podcast listeners, if you hear my voice right now, I need you to do something for me. I want you to take out your phone or on your computer, go to Apple Podcasts, search for Ask Your Oldhead Podcast. You'll see my logo, my little picture, my little image there. Find the show. Please rate and write a review. It's a small thing, but it helps others find this work and find what I'm doing here. And it really, really matters, as small as that may seem. So if you could please do that before we get into the show, I would much appreciate it. Thank you for listening. Let's get into it. Peace. This is Good Brothers. As always, take the best part for yourself. Peace. I'm Majestic.
My brother Justice, what's happening?
Man, I'm we're here again where we are,
sir.
And at the time we do it.
Right. That's right. So y'all pay up.
Indeed. And so this week, and I guess has been a thing this year, and as we expected, we've had another, who I would feel comfortable saying, leader of the last age, return, in this case being Vernon Jordan, passed, I guess that was midweek, like Wednesday or Tuesday.
Mm-hmm.
And, I don't know how current generation, I don't know how young folks now, one, I don't know how they see or understand Vernon Jordan. And two, I don't know how they would characterize Vernon Jordan, especially within wherever we're at with this tense dynamic of Black capitalism versus Black not capitalism, because like I said, I'm not gonna call it socialism because I don't totally know if that's what people think it is. But whatever this we have an internal operate like conversational, academic, and community, I think, organizing tension around like how money and business and all these things work. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes, I don't remember this week seeing that, like, an outpouring of understanding in terms of people who I guess would see themselves as, proponents of Blackness speaking to Vernon Jordan's return. So that to me indicates that some people either don't really know or they don't hold him in that esteem or they frame him maybe in a different light. But I thought, when you thought, and I agreed with what you thought, that we should make some space to talk about Vernon Jordan today, and I wholeheartedly 100% agree. So, I guess I can give people the super quick historical aspect. Vernon Jordan, was one of the NAACP rep, I think, for the state of Georgia. So his contemporaries, Medgar Evers, what's the brother in Florida? I can't recall off the top. And other such, he was in that generation of workers. He, was from Atlanta originally, born in 1935. Went, Howard Law School, worked for Hollowell, one of the big lawyers of the NAACP in the South during the Civil Rights Movement. And later went on to run the Urban League for a long time, and then went on in many ways to become sort of the brother in the room in terms of breaking down doors with boards in corporate America, advisor or confidant to presidents. I think most people probably of our generation would at least maybe connect the most to Bill Clinton, because at that time when Bill Clinton did what he was doing, Republicans tried to come after him, which was not a veiled at all attempt to discredit him in his impact within the corporate world. So that's a couple quick facts, man. But what's your thoughts, I guess, just to get us moving on Vernon Jordan and his return?
So I think one of the first things I want to talk about, I think, is your point to be made around how, a titan of Black America could pass and it'd be totally based on age and the time that you're around of the importance that you put on it. Right. So again, in this broader time of, it's funny when you juxtapose it versus like Judas and the Black Messiah, right? And everyone's like, we don't need Black capitalism. We need, socialism. We need fire with fire. We need fire with water. And I think a lot of young people really engage in and embracing the message of Chairman Fred Hampton. So you juxtapose, and I think we should be clear, that movie was made as an extension of capitalism. Right? Like, there was a movie made about Chairman Fred Hampton's life to make money.
Right.
Like, they made the movie. It wasn't a documentary, right? No. They made the movie to make money. And there were people who were paid handsomely to make the money. And, fortunately, those people have been supportive of Chairman Fred Hampton Jr. and Mama, the wife of Fred Hampton, and Hampton House. So, I think that's really positive. But it's important to see that dichotomy, that while people are bringing the chairman's name back up, they're doing it via a movie and with actors who are being paid, right? And soundtracks at corporate places, right?
Indeed.
The very thing that Vernon Jordan was known for.
Yep.
Right? The ability to be in the room, to have conversations, to get things greenlit, right? To get people access, right?
Mm-hmm. Like
that idea, very similar to, the brother, the Black Godfather. You know what I'm saying? From out LA. You know what I mean? Like, this idea that while we're championing things on corporate mediums, right? Facebook's a corporate medium, Twitter's a corporate medium, about a corporate movie, but knocking capitalism. Now, again, that's not to say that in any way I'm a wholehearted proponent of hyper and global capitalism that has made, has horrible impacts on people. It's just the irony of the American system. So anyway, I just think it's about an age thing. I think, people a little older than us and up remember that, at one point, Vernon Jordan was kind of like one of the leaders of Black America. You know what I mean? He was one of the people, who's doing all these kind of things. And again, being at some point, you could argue, probably the most powerful Black man in America, and definitely the most powerful unelected Black man in America, right? With being in the shadow cabinet of Bill Clinton, President Clinton, right? And just what that means and what that represents, and what part of the struggle of Black and by extension brown people in America, his role has played for the economic and social norming we find ourselves with today. And I think that's a really important component for us to think about. What does it mean when someone has fought for certain things become norms? And just like people fought so much for the norm for you to be able, as he often would say, to be able to go into the hotel, then it was someone who fought for you to be able to pay for the hotel once you were done. Right? And so that conversation around both sides of this equation that we still find ourselves having today, and that corporate America still has miles to go on. I just think without him, you don't have the too few people that we take for granted as head of corporations. Yeah. Right. Yeah. But, Ursula Burns, to Ken Chenault's, like, without those kind of people, without Vernon Jordan, it's difficult to get those people. It's difficult to lead from the top and get Black people to be hiring people who look like them, to get women that people to hire look like them. Right. That kind of, glass ceiling that he was able to shatter, that then allowed other people to be able to shatter, that has made this world palpably different, even if we're in a time that doesn't necessarily seem to be kind of like, that doesn't want to be chronicled,
Well, so I did, I tried to accelerate my, what's up with Vernon Jordan, personal update, you know what I'm saying, in the light of this, just so, I could speak with a fresh mind on a couple things. So there's a pretty good PBS, little doc that came out last year, actually, that's available to the end of March, I think, free most places in the country. So if you want to at least get a little crash course on the man, I would suggest you check that out. But one of the things that I thought about initially when he passed was one, and it's something so I went and also located an interview on I think it's Joe Middleton podcast or radio show. I guess it's on Sirius, but And this was from like 2010. So it was a little older, obviously, but in the interview, Joe asked him about like leadership and being a leader and some other things. We asked him about Obama, and then it was like 2-3 threads, but it was clear, one, that Vernon's intent in that discussion was to talk about leadership. Right. So like one, and it's something that he starts off in the PBS joint. He's like writing a speech and he's talking about the importance of being someone that's asked to speak. Right. And as two people who get asked to speak a lot, you might sometimes understand this in an intuitive way, or, at least I would say sometimes I know that part of being people asking you to speak is they're confident you're going to say something worth being heard. Right. And so he speaks about the role of a speaker, saying something that is meaningful, that people will listen to and want to hear, but also that is useful, right? That is going to improve or help them or will move something forward. And so he asked him about Obama and like, what his presidency meant at that point, and he just spoke to, look, his first 100 days is leadership. Like he's in there and he's establishing some form of guidance of what's happening here. Right. And then he goes though to this, he asked him, and I don't think he's not the first person I've heard say this, so I don't think he was in any way trying to claim the idea, but differentiating between when he was head of the Urban League, that he had a constituency, right? And so he was a Black leader because he had a constituency that he was responsible and accountable to, right? And he had to speak to that constituency's needs, speak to that constituency's values, what they've asked him to do as their appointed leader, right? And then he differentiated being a leading Black, meaning somebody that, people might value what I say, but I don't have a constituency. I'm not actively accountable to anyone, right? And I think we've discussed this a bit over this last year with the with the current iteration of community uprisings and racial tumult and the BLM and the not BLM and this and whatever, all the different shades, but that tension of when you were creating a functionally, for tactical reasons, sort of leaderless movement. The other side of that is you sort of don't have an accountability device for the ideas, right? And what's said or who's stating for whom, and I'm not saying it's a good or a bad thing, but it's a thing to think about, because then when we're, framing what people should or shouldn't do, and I think that shows up in even this response, to his passing, is that and also points to the second thing, which I don't hope I get to both of these before I pass back to you. One is that it was clear to me, and then even reading through, when you read through his book, Vernon can read, and I'm reading his other joint on public speaking, that it's important to he understood that people need to be in leadership roles, and that people leading things is not the same as being a member. That's one of the things I took from looking at the way he's operated and moved, right? There was a part in the thing where I don't remember if it was in that area, but talking about why he didn't take the attorney generalship, from Clinton, right? And, and it's one of those things, if you're just looking for the next spot to be I'll be the first Black attorney general. But he had the wisdom to go, yeah, that'd be great. You know what I mean? But I think he says to Bill Clinton is basically but if when you need some advice, I can't help you. When you need me to be a person that's going to give you valuable input, who you going to go to? Right? He at some point recognized that his most valuable place in the service of, I'm going to say in the service of Black people, and also the larger service of America, the entity being, or in any way it's aspiring or reaching the ideas that are captured in paper, is me being a person that can influence outcomes in these different spaces. It's not for me to be the face of something or the, the president of Black people, so to speak. You know what I'm saying? And so when you see him, I think one of the joints where it talks about Goldman Sachs, and it's like Goldman Sachs asked you to be on the board. You gotta look at that. Am I supposed to say no?
Look at that.
Like, I'm supposed to say no? Like, what kind of sense does that make? And it's and so for me, I was thinking about that, tied with the understanding that all that also is backdropped by a skill set, right? So it's not just this like I'm in the role of prominence or privilege just by happenstance. I also have skills. I have communication skills. I have understanding of systems and functions of things. I understand. I'm observant of people. I have a capacity of engage and be present in spaces and not just earn people's trust, but show that people value my presence because it does something to the function of things. And whether one thinks Black and brown people excelling, thing within corporate boards is a corporate apparatus in general is a good or bad thing. I mean, that's, we could debate that. It definitely is not a good thing for us to be fully, to be
not there,
right. And then also not have our own thing that can operate without the other thing. Right. And
right.
So that was one of my, first thoughts or impacts, like kind of reviewing, how he moved and the places that he showed up.
Well, I think to add on, I think it's important too, because Vernon Jordan also, and I think this is something, again, that is kind of built into many of our perspectives today. It's like there are different acts of your life, right? Mm-hmm. So on Vernon Jordan's, like, I think you see a really interesting thing coming out of the civil rights movement, heading into the 80s, 90s, and to the next millennium, where you have him playing, well, one, I think place is a very important conversation with Vernon Jordan. One, in being born in Atlanta and his mother having a successful business. I think it's a really important part. And so the idea of Vernon could read comes from the governor mocking, saying that he could read, right? Mm-hmm. As his mother was, doing commerce, which is a conversation that you and I know we're going to have soon about kind of like a provocative book. Let's just say that. But like doing commerce, and then he goes and does what you would argue many of the race men of that time did, right? He became a lawyer, helped with the desegregation of the University of Georgia, right? Like did all the things that we would say in that time was representative of serving the needs of Black people. So he does a voter education project, works with NAACP, is a lawyer, gets his law degree from Howard, works with Thurgood Marshall, right? He does all the things that we say. And then his next kind of act, if you will, is then the act of the transition to leadership by that point of organizations. You know what I'm saying? And when you look at, we talk about the Urban League, but one of the things is he was briefly the head of United Negro College Fund. Mm-hmm. And at one point was the head of United Negro College Fund and the Urban League at the same time, because he was trying to make sure that the United Negro College Fund wasn't left in the lurch. So he moves to a level of leadership of institutions that then have to engage with the broader society. So whether it's looking at getting resources from funders, many of whom were white during the UNCF time, to the Urban League, which was kind of at that point the leader at kind of talking about, and to your point about constituency leadership, the leader at talking about the issues and concerns of Black people from a constituency-based thing that meant you had to listen to this leader, that this leader was accountable to a community and the community was accountable to the leader, meaning if the leader didn't do what the community said, they would get rid of him. Mm-hmm. Right? Many of our institutions have gone through different challenges to the point where we have almost become contemptuous of our institutions. Yeah. Right. And have opted for different organizational strategies, right?
Yeah.
But from 71 to 81, essentially being the person in the room dealing with presidents, dealing with corporations, getting them to invest in places they didn't invest, getting them to engage around the Black community around what some of the goals, because obviously, and he talks about it in the book, it's not all of the goals of the Black community. It was always a tension between, at that point, what he would call the militants and, you know, folks who were looking for more of a broader engagement in society.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So that's not new, right? So he does that for 10 years. He's obviously shot in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And then he decides to take another kind of space in the arc of, here's the institution. We ran the institution. The institutions are strong. Now, one, personally, what do I go do in advocacy of Black people, right? That may not be as directly connected to a constituency group, but based on my experience, is also forwarding the interest of this particular group in spaces where before this we have not been. Which again, now 40 years later, we all take that for granted, right? We like even the idea, for example, Jay-Z selling a business and getting on Square's board, right? That's like, oh, okay, yeah, Jay-Z sold a business, got on Square's board. No, Jay-Z being a board director on Square, that's a unique thing. And if you don't have the Vernon Jordans of the world making it real, that's where Black people need to be, looking at the overall fiduciary and health of an organization, then you don't have some of those things. So I think he showed people the acts that you can function in by being dedicated to your community through your lens, right? And I think that's also something that we all have to kind of deal with. Like, what does it mean to be dedicated to your community through your lens? Which doesn't mean everyone's always going to agree with the lens. But can you look at the situation and say, what is my personal contribution to my community in ways that I can give back and provide leadership in ways that make Black people's lives better? And it may always not be the institutional way. It may not be the advocacy way, but it's still going to be a way that has this broader impact.
Yeah. And something that I think this is a point that folks should consider and think about too. When he took over as the head of the Urban League, I think he was the first that had not been a social worker before, if not him and Whitney Young, but I think he was the first who basically didn't have a background in social service, so to speak.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, and you know, I think that's significant in terms of, understanding sort of like, what the Urban League shows up now, at least in most cities. I don't know all places. I know it's usually much more policy focused. Then, I mean, well, here the Urban League does do a lot of the kind of balance a little bit of both, because it does do several like service programs, but even the origin of like the Urban League coming to Portland or starting up in Portland was, as Black people started really migrating here in larger numbers, the leadership, as it were, of the city, basically implored, I think it was I don't want to misquote the history, but basically after some issues, the brother came out, now I'll find a name and put it in the thing if I can find the link, the Oregon Historical Society article about it. And basically like, can y'all help us with these Black people? like the Urban League will come in and fix the problem or some shit. And Urban League was like, well, actually you need to make this, the city shit ain't fair out here. And, if you want the Black people to be cool, like you need to improve, their situation. Like they need to be able to live full lives and what they need to do for themselves. And then, here, that then, led, to the formation of the first chapter and all that history. And I will allow, those who are more qualified to tell that full story, to tell it. You know what I mean? But the reality of different organizations that are started or founded by Black people, you know what I'm saying, but that then have a national, imprint, is a significant part of how we have, work to better our situation, within this society, and, as the Urban League, I think of the Urban League and NAACP as organizations that now people think of as like the establishment, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
That both of those were rooted in challenge. You know what I mean? Whether you agree with, their tactics or their, the positions they've taken over the year, and even sometimes, quite frankly, the way they may function now or what they do or don't, say or make a statement about, that's fine. But, I would really like to get us in our own analysis to move from this to a place of having to like judge its value or its meaning, as opposed to looking at it represents an assembly of what Black people think. Right. And so then within that can we look for, I think speaking to Chairman Fred, and I think the most important thing, at least that was highlighted in the movie, Chairman Fred said, where there's people, there's power. So if you ain't really engaged with what the people want, regardless of what particular political philosophy you're espousing in your rhetoric, you ain't really about the people then. Like, you gotta be about the people. And if it's people over there, you need to go talk to them people, even if you don't agree with them or they don't agree with you. Like, I'm gonna go engage with them, see what they talking about. And I think the straight in the way Vernon Jordan moved was, I need to be able to get in the room, and then I gotta be able to get in the room and be able to have impact. If I can't ever get in no room with somebody that has the ability to impact my life, and no one that I know can get in the room, then, we're at a disadvantage. And I think that, I just think that that's something we have to wrestle with and be comfortable with. I see oftentimes when people don't really want to have that responsibility, as I see it. Right. So then either they'll accept that they don't want that responsibility, or they will try to frame a way to make it seem like wanting that responsibility is a character flaw or a deficiency of some kind, which I think, is just wholly unhealthy and is, we're not going to get where we need to go as long as we are disparaging people who are trying to find a way to improve our condition in our future outcomes. The other thing I thought, though, and I'd like to get your thought about this, how important do you think it is, though, like his honestly, commitment to mentorship and mentoring and bringing people along? Like, what were some of your thoughts around that as it shows up in his, life?
So I think these two things will tie in together. I think coming from what you just really talked about was the power of being in the room in the inside-outside game. And I think, through time, we have these different cycles of what we're more enamored with. There are times that we're more enamored with being in the room, and times where the collective imagination is more enamored with being outside the room, right? I would say, generally speaking, right now, the more collective imagination, as propositioned by social media and current kind of political / advocacy culture, is being outside to make the change with the few people who are inside the room. But that's usually only with politics, not with corporate spaces. So we're not always being like, forgetting the brother's name that runs Bevel right now, but like, we're not always chanting his name as we talk about somebody being down with Procter & Gamble or being on the board of Foot Locker and Shake Shack, even though you eat a lot of hamburgers and buy a lot of sneakers, right? So it's like, we just have this right now. That's our collective imagination, is really the external conversation around power, and kind of, pardon the horrible parable or connection to Trump and them, but bum rushing the show, so to speak, right? Where they actually did bum rush the show. We kind of talking about bum rushing the show. They literally bum rushed the show. Yeah. But we discussed that already. But so yeah, I think like the idea of who's in the room to talk about things that are important to you when you're not in the room. And you didn't elect that person, because that's not how they got to be a director of a corporation, right? Yeah. That's just not the structure or way that's done, but it's done through influence and power in society, where someone gets that ability to represent something that may be about your interests. That person is not responsible to represent everything you care for, nor are you responsible to support or have to back everything they think. But it is rational that a person that has a background will get in the room and say something that is beneficial to Black people as a whole. Yeah. And I think one thing, I think in different ways, Vernon Jordan was always comfortable with where he stood in that equation, even if other people weren't always happy with where he stood, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the thing you and I both understand, when you're in systems, you got to be okay with yourself at the end of the day. Doesn't mean everybody is always going to like how you made the decision to carry yourself. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But if you know your principles, you can show them through your activities. You got to be okay with how you moved in that room. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So that's one thing, which leads to the other thing I think is part of this conversation is mentorship and these kind of things. Again, I'm really looking at it how it flowed through systems. We always talk about Andrew Young being mentored by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Or let's use another one that may be a little more sensitive to people, but it's still relevant. Muhammad Ali Mr. Farrakhan being mentored by El Hajj Mali Shabazz. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And so we just constantly, we have those examples, but then as our struggles and as our relationships shift to the systems, who goes and does the thing at that point to have the influence? So Whitney Young influenced Vernon Jordan, which he gives the ultimate respect to Whitney Young, who I think is another person who doesn't get his kind of respect in the annals of kind of the Black community. Because again, I think at that time, it just wasn't seen quite as sexy in the collective imagination, what Whitney Young did versus what some others did. And then he died in a really tragic and unfortunate way before he got to kind of do everything he was trying to do. So, him mentoring him, then in turn, Vernon Jordan mentoring Ron Brown, right? And Ron Brown, then in turn, mentoring a whole host of people and that are still in Black politics to this day. Mm-hmm. So I think what starts to happen is once you start to move out of collective activity and you start to see the role of an individual taking their time to mentor and set up places for success for others, you start to see, with the power of what Vernon Jordan really was able to do, to say to Xerox, because he was on the board of Xerox when Ursula Burns was coming up through the ranks, mm-hmm. and being able to say to them, give her another look. If he doesn't say it in the room, who says it, right? Like, how do we get that person to be able to have that? So his mentorship to a whole host of corporate people who are now in corporate America is legendary, right? That then those folks have mentored other people. And I think the mentorship, I think owing to many of our challenges and opportunities in our community, if you say mentorship, someone goes, oh, you mean like big brothers, big sisters? Or like right. we work with kids, right? Like we don't even frame mentorship like adult to adult mentors. And I think that is that's a challenge, because we're missing something if we only frame what someone could do is a 21-year-old mentoring a 14-year-old versus a 42-year-old mentoring a 29-year-old.
Right.
Right? Like, and what does that mean for our collective success if we're only looking at mentoring in this most basic level? You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So, so I see the power in what he did was knowing, again, where he could be most effective. Right? And then doing that and then bringing people along with him that, again, of that generation of people that are talking, there's no one, even if they went in different directions than Vernon Jordan, have something bad to say about Vernon Jordan.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And I think it's actually, I want to go back on that because I think honestly, there's not many pathways outside of like, you having some individual business thing or concept that you do to progress in any field, any area of service or work without, some access to someone that can give you some input, some guidance on the work, right? That a mentor within that reality does. And then often sometimes that goes and is in a position of power to go, no. You know who y'all should consider for this role? You know who needs to be brought in on this conversation? You know who, you know what I mean? And you know, I think that's the backdrop of the idea of networking. And I know that there's a thing that happens now within the context of like people's entrepreneurial practice and stuff where they do this sort of like reaching out to people and asking them to be your mentor, which I still think is a little bit weird. I mean, it's one thing to ask somebody, can I have a cup of coffee with you and learn something, as opposed to can you become my mentor? I don't know. I don't know.
Well, it's very one way. I guess what I would argue, that's very one way in ways that we need to think about it, because it's like a relationship. Like at some point, it has to be felt in both ways, right? Like, yes, a man or a woman or people can make a decision to reach out to somebody else, but if that's only one way for so long, it ain't a relationship.
Yeah.
And so, you know, the cup of coffee and seeing the mutual benefit is about mentorship, not this idea of what can I get from you. It ends up being, to your point, still extremely transactional and not human-centered.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And I think that but there's also something that even you read, like, different, like I said, some of the different sources and the stories that I went to check to prepare for this conversation. You know, he always speaks about Hollowell, Medgar Evers, William Medgar Evers being his contemporary, but like the people that were there, sort of instructors, sort of the people that got them situated in the work and what have you, like that. And he says multiple times, like, if you think whatever I did, like I did this because people prepared me. Like, if you think I'm good or I'm great or whatever, it's because people prepared me. I didn't do this by myself, and I didn't do it just for myself, right? The man clearly made a lot of paper. I'm just make it plain, because I'm sure that for some folks that would be the contentious, or the contending viewpoint on him or his value or care for Black people would be, well, he worked in what became or was a high-powered lobbying firm in D.C. Hundreds, I think, many corporate boards. And for those that don't know, when you're on a large corporation's board, they pay you.
Right.
Unlike when
when you're on a nonprofit board, where you give all your time and energy, and you may not get a lunch or a dinner, and you're expected to give money.
Oh, right? Yeah. To make it plain.
Right. So the idea of, at some juncture, someone is paying you for your actual experience and ways of understanding business. Yeah. Right. Yeah, versus someone taking your time, energy, effort, and sometimes money to forward something that you care about. Now, which is fine, which, I mean, I do have challenges with some of our current board, like our board structures. I think that sometimes, people's names are used versus their skills and experience. Mm-hmm. And then also, in the community, sometimes we have to be thoughtful around what does it mean for people to be prepped to do board work. But
yeah, well, what I think I will speak to it, and I speak to this from the pragmatic reality of doing good community work with great people and seeing those great people having a ton of work that those that know appreciate and love and give and hold esteem for them for their service, but also bear witness that they're doing a second level of like 30 hours of work, 30 hours, 40 hours, of work that we don't have. We have not created a vision that compensates them so that they can, quite frankly, be able to relax at some point. You know what I'm saying? Or we ask a lot of people that serve and are in a position to serve. We ask a lot of them, and there becomes a point where they either tap out, you know what I'm saying, or we get diminishing returns because they're they're doing too much. And I think that in service to the alternative vision of the world that we want to build, how do we make a space for people to do service, right? But also then if we are doing business, we're doing economic creation, things that deal with, the building of your business. Like I know I hear a lot of people talk about the LLCs and all that other stuff, and I always think like, I was like, do any people ever? I mean, like, you know, I understand if you're doing one person business, you may not need like a whole board. You know, you just need you and maybe one other person. But at some point, if you build a big entity, you're gonna need a board that can hold you accountable. That it can like ask you questions, can know stuff that you don't know. And within that, are you planning the head in your entrepreneurial vision of personal financial dominance to pay people for their expertise and wisdom, right? Because
it's the cycle of all the game is free, right? Mm-hmm. And if I'm doing something good, then you should put me on my feet so I can go do it, which is okay. But to your point, a lot of our visions of building businesses don't really think about building corporations that then have to have a board that you're accountable to. So a lot of businesses are often, our vision is like, build this business. And then it's not even as far as people being like, then sell it, which Jay-Z does. He just, and listen.
I ain't mad at him. This is a strategy.
Build it, sell it. Build it, sell it. It's the American way. He just made a whole bunch of money in last week. Yeah. $600 million, something like that, estimated last week, right? So, but again, he's going to then have the power to be on a $10 billion board, right? So he leveraged his company in making $300 million to now be able to influence what Jack Dorsey does with a huge business with huge market cap. Mm-hmm. Again, this is the stuff that Vernon Jordan created opportunities for us to do. Yeah. Right? This is the kind of thoughtfulness and frankly, clearly Jay-Z has had some mentorship as well as he mentors people. I just think that, going back to your point, mentors and mentees have to have a kind of like more than transactional relationship. You might not call it transformational, but at least got to be a two-way street. Right? Another part of that kind of two-way street I want to talk about is his relationship with Bill Clinton, and something that I think is not often talked about. One, Vernon Jordan met Bill Clinton like early in his career, right? He actually met Hillary Rodham, before Bill Clinton, but met him early when he was doing his thing, his failed run for governor of Arkansas. Mm-hmm. And one thing in the book he talks about is like, he's smart and he was good people. So I kept in contact, and I kept in contact even when he wasn't doing well, which is also part of our current space we have to be very thoughtful around, which is you only reach out to people when they're up. Mm-hmm. One thing that he talked about was reaching out to people when they weren't up, because if I think you're smart, it's just a great investment. And I think you're a good person. It's just a good investment to be concerned with what happens to you. Right. And I think that those are practices and techniques that, again, unless you're in the room with people who have done these kind of things, it can be difficult to know that that's how you should see the world. Right. Absolutely. Like that's where you're at. And the other part of their relationship is a very little known fact about Bill Clinton. 1991, he's running. Many business leaders and other folks were extremely unsure about his campaign, extremely unsure about the idea of him being president. Vernon Jordan is the person that took him as part of the Bilderberger Group to Germany to meet global business leaders. Mm. Vernon Jordan was a Bilderberger before Bill Clinton was a Bilderberger. You know what I mean? Like, again, and I think this speaks to sometimes how we understand power and possibility. Like the idea that there was a black man is enough to we be like, oh man, you part of the bootleg, you're part of the rich black people. Yeah, okay. But he was part of the rich other people. And he got a chance to take his friend to meet business leaders to then say, hey, you're all right with us, to then make it easier for him to become president. That debt can't be repaid. But that, again, that is a two-way street. And that is something based on a relationship. And to your point earlier, skills. Yeah. And the skills are always not the skills written down on paper, but the skills are what make you important and vital to yourself, to your family, to your community, and to a country, and to an industry.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, that's big though. That's ill. I mean, I think that no one. I don't think most people would. I would say the way I remember experiencing the discussion of Vernon Jordan in the '90s, during the Monica the Clinton impeachment investigation, it was as if, like, you know what I'm saying, the best characterization from my community was like Vernon Jordan along for the ride, you know what I'm saying, on Clinton, you know, on whoever, you know what I mean, whatever right. Corporate America's thing. And it's like, well, maybe. I mean, maybe.
Right, but no, actually,
yeah,
Vernon like, Jordan brought him along,
right? Put him on,
gave him the access to be able to do something that he was not able to do himself. Even with Yale, Oxford governor, there was still rooms he wasn't able to get into.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things I guess I want to elevate, you know, in some of the reading on him, and I mean, I think that folks should also look into, right, and understand how, you know, operating in the segregated society, you know, that was, you know, Atlanta and Georgia of his youth, and, you know, where I guess where Georgia is now, where Georgia appears to be heading, right, in terms of, you know, political and economic influence, especially as it pertains to Black people and other people of color, because, you know, within the dynamic of you know, Black people, many ways moving back to the Atlanta or moving to the Atlanta area, becoming continuing the line and becoming a center of Black culture, you know, going back to when we was in high school, that I felt like that started, you know what I mean, or at least I guess that's when I became aware of it, is that part of how he was able to go to law school at Howard, or at least pay for it, is that the state of Georgia and other states, South Carolina, all of them, they would pay Black people, they would pay the difference in the tuition for Black people to go get education in other states, to not stay in their state. Right. So just because I think when we talk about segregation, and you know, and especially that there's a tendency these days to speak to some sort of like that there was some virtue in our position. That I'm just like, look, I think y'all talking too fast, because none of my, you know, when I talk to my elders that lived through it, ain't none of them trying to go back. So you know, just but just the idea that the state government would pay if you was a Black person that had, you did whatever you had to do to show yourself skilled enough to get you know, whatever level of education under those conditions, they would pay another state to take you,
to have you.
So you hopefully would not come back here and, you know, we have to deal with you.
Keep kicking up dust, right?
You know what I'm saying? And so that we don't even we can avoid acknowledging that this is happening, and that you have the, like, one, we already we have hard concrete evidence that we you know, despite what maybe would have been the public statement of government persons and also public policy, you know, as it pertained to, you know, white elected officials at those times in their political apparatus, who would have said that, oh, well, we don't even, the Black people, they can't even achieve it. This level. Well, you put it in the state code, you quite clearly have evidence that Black people are going to do all these things, because you've created an eventuality to get them out of the state. Right. So when we think about public policy and rules and how resources are delineated and what's built into what something says when it says it, I just would like people to think about that there, and it's not the first time, because even something now that happens is states that want to get, you know, get talented or apparently talented young people to come to their state. You know, they'll let you, you'll give you a scholarship that makes your tuition the same as in-state, you know what I'm saying? Or, you know, all these things, like, these are tools that things that people that this is how resources can shape directions. And I thought it was sort of remarkable that, you know, and he was like, yeah, that's cool. I mean, they're going to help. You know, it's like same time the state is saying, you know, segregation and we hate these, you know, these, you know, darkies and, you know, all sorts of rhetoric. They also like, look, we're going to pay so you don't come back home. we'll put some money on it. Like, you know what I'm saying? And I think that it is important to, I hope that, and this is what I wanted to get into, I didn't speak to earlier. There's still so much of the depth of understanding of like the nuance and the detail of Black history as it pertains to stuff like that I feel like I don't know that we really elevate and talk about within the context of the present and even our present decision making that is beneficial, that we should. And then even, you know, I was thinking about like that whole generation, and this is maybe my closing thought. So I've been working through you know, for colored girls who consider politics. And one of the early concepts in the book, she always, because it's a narrator, I'm not 100% sure who's speaking at what time. But this concept of the have-somes, like, and that's the way that they characterize, like, you know, Black people who had some stuff happening. You know, there was a doctor, or maybe there's a lawyer, or there was a professional, you know, just like, you know, I'm from a family of have-somes. You know what I'm saying? Like, my father did this, my mother did that. And so we had some things, we had some ability to move around, and we came to this, you know, wherever the four-figure persons in that story. I think it would be great, and I think it'd be a great benefit in the coming years to us as a community, and I think it'll benefit our larger, you know, public policy, political, economic policy thinking and decision making, to investigate and really develop how we talk about class, you know, position, and all these things in our community. Hopefully, in a place that does not create, I don't know, this sense that if someone had a more privileged position, that then they are wrong, and also that we only validate the achievement if it came from someone who started in the worst possible place. You know what I'm saying? Like, I started with, you know, my mother died during pregnancy, during the delivery, with cocaine in my veins, and my father was shot 2 days later, and then I was raised by the foster, like, and then I was, you know what I mean, like, the most challenging. That's the only time your achievement is valid, is if you come from the worst and most deplorable and unfair circumstances. And then on the other hand, that, you know, if you do minor improvement from, you know, just like we gotta get better. We gotta find a way that we can talk about what we're doing and who we are without, you know, as I see it, making this thing where it's like a value judgment of your background. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know who that really serves. You know what I'm saying? And I would say that the larger established media, they love to find a Black person who's had the worst possible experience in life and talk about them. And sometimes I feel like we're too comfortable with going, yeah, that's cool, and they're saying, hey, brother, like, you sound like you trading on your pain and and misery that other people ain't been able to escape. So, you know, maybe put a little salt in your situation. And on the other hand, where we're at with, you know, if you have started life with a very privileged circumstance and you're not aware that other people are suffering, not due to their lack of effort, but due to where they started in the contest, you know, please show some, you know, slow down with your hubris, and you know, show, you know, find some humility. So that's the end of Justice mini soapbox on that. But
good. So I would say, just in closing for me, is two things like you talked about, and I think this conversation around segregation. We may like how we responded. It's okay to like how we responded to it versus liking the thing itself. Mm-hmm. We can like how we respond to segregation without liking segregation, right? Like, what we're really talking about is our resilience. We're not talking about the actual de facto segregation, right? Or the ability that you can't go to a grocery store, or ability you can't go shop in the store. We're talking about, we took that and then created things to make our own. Those should be bifurcated, right? Those should be separated. We care about our resilience. The policy wasn't cool. So then going back to, I wish we were back here. No, you don't. You don't wish that you couldn't go to the supermarket. You don't wish that you couldn't have access to global capital. You don't wish that you had to stop on the side of a road or be in a hotel a certain way because Black folks couldn't go places. You know what I mean? Like, you don't wish that. So that's one thing. So the second thing that I'll say is in regard to your conversation about class, is the broader kind of dialogue on, at one point, being a race woman or race man was not connected to class, right? Post nonprofit industrial complex, I think we have shifted this idea of what it means to act on behalf of Black people. Let's be real. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. wasn't born poor. Yeah. He dedicated himself to care about Black people. I'm just using the Atlanta context for this. Andrew Young wasn't born poor. W.B. Du Bois wasn't born poor, right? Like, we have this idea. Fred Hampton wasn't born poor.
Right.
Right? Like, Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael, for people who haven't changed since the 60s. He wasn't born poor. Being a race man or woman didn't mean that you were born poor. It meant you cared about your people and you used the things you had to further the community you were from. And so I think, to your point, right now we're in a place of unsophisticated class perspectives on who's blackest is who's poorest, because we've fallen victim to the idea that the blackest experience is the poorest experience. And I think with the creation of American ghettos, specifically in the North, the Midwest, and the South, right? Mm-hmm. That experience is now chronicled above all, right? Mm-hmm. Even when it comes to our music, when it comes to everything. That's the experience that is the essence of the Black community. When that is but one manifestation of the Black community.
Yeah.
It is not the Black community. And I just think that we find ourselves trapped in that perspective because of the programming and because of the importance of kind of shifting the lot of our people who find themselves in those places. We've gotten to a point of acting like, if you're not there, then you're not really Black enough. Right? Or if you've done well, you're not really Black enough unless you were poor and then you did well. Then we still might say you're not Black enough, or we might say it's okay because you used to be really Black, so we're okay with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You started out super Black, so we think we like you, no matter what you're doing now.
There's still some remnants of being super Black, unless you're from a class time before us, with which we don't give you no credit.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we won't give you no credit if you Al Sharpton. But we still might give some other people credit. We give Jay-Z credit. He ain't been poor. He wasn't poor in the 90s. Jay-Z ain't been poor in 30 years.
Right.
Right? He has not been a person you would consider poor since 1990. Right? But yet, he's still seen as fully in his Blackness, where you could take somebody else's because they might wear a suit and have made the same amount of money or less than him and question their Blackness. So again, the nonprofit industrial complex, the ghetto industrial complex, and then a resulting music coming out of those complexes, frankly, and the fetishization of Blackness, both by non-Black people and by Black people, I think has created this complexity of what it means to be Black on both sides is harmful. Right? Like, sometimes it's almost like you ain't Black enough if you don't do all the stuff that Black people do. But sometimes the only way you Black is if you've been harmed. And neither is true. So that's it for me.
Right. Yeah, man. So, I'll make, I guess, my super closing. I'm just like, one love and respect, to Vernon Jordan, his family, his descendants, what have you. Thank you. You know what I mean? His contribution, you know what I'm saying, to what has happened and the reality of our lives for this last, at least a part of the time that I I've been in the mix. You know what I'm saying? So, much love and respect to that. And then just to people, man, like I said, you are not required to accept what you hear on the news as what you should remember about a person. Like, go do some research, do some reading. A great many of the different people, whether those books are good or bad, that we could look at as Black leaders over the last, 30, 40, 50 years. There's a book, somebody got a book about them. You know what I mean? So go pick up the book. Hopefully they got a book they did themselves. You know what I'm saying? And my thing, I think that would be really valuable at this time, as much as, and I'll say this for a future conversation because it did actually come from something that Charles Blow stated in an interview about talk about his new book, but sort of the race books that are clearly not necessarily race books for Black people, like they're kind of chronicles of information for other people to understand Black people. Somewhere within this development, the how we embrace understanding the history of the different forms of leadership and resistance that have shaped the last century, I think is really going to be important for our current generation as our young people. And when I say that, I say our under like 25, 26 crowd is having their, realization moments in these different ways. Us making sure that they get the right information and the stories of these folks from the 60s and 70s and the 80s and the 90s is really going to be vitally important, because otherwise there'll be a giant hole in how these time frames and what work was going on and what people were doing is seen, and will likely lead to the repeat of, quite frankly, bad policy decision making and choices. So that's it for me.
My man.
Right. Man, well, appreciate you, guys. And so with that, I say peace.
Peace.
Thank you for listening to Good Brothers. Thank you to my good brother, Majestic. As always, you can find the podcast if you search for AskYourOldhead.com or search for Ask Your Oldhead, I guess. Also, you can go to AskYourOldhead.com and see the podcast there. But it's most easily found by connecting and finding the pod on wherever you listen to podcasts. So Apple Music, SoundCloud even. What else? All of them. Radio Public. The Google Podcast, we're having a little bit of a technical problem. I think their app is, for some reason, pulling the wrong feed. But we'll work on that. Or I should say, I'll work on that. Podcast is brought to you every week by myself with the good help of my good brother for coming in and conversating and adding on with me. Please take the best part for yourself. If you want to support the podcast, first thing you can do is to share and to listen, regularly. You can also become a patron on Patreon. You could also head to the Etsy shop and buy a sweatshirt or a t-shirt or a mug. More to come on that front in this year as I'm getting the new season of Ask Your Oldhead in line. It should be a very interesting year and a deeper exploration into, what it means to be, what the life of Black men is like right now. At least through my lens as a creator and a contributor. Anyway, I'm gonna stop talking your ear off. So thank you for listening. And as always, take the best part for yourself. Peace.